Good morning, good evening to you, beautiful friends, wherever you happen to be in this world. I want to first and foremost thank you for joining me. As you can see, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently, and I am not going to have enough time to unpack as much as I would like to, but I was prompted by a subscriber, my friend the Yellow Flash, who, interestingly enough, has been such an exploration. We have aligned quite literally through the YouTube and the interwebs, and as more than likely a fellow INFJ, I don't know if they've taken their MBTI type, etc., and if they identify, but they definitely seem to resonate and seem to help me get into a very creative headspace in some of the thoughts that I ponder. And so I was prompted, an inquiry was made as to seeing karma. And so I want to elaborate onto that a little bit. So I think that a lot of times we think of karma as like cause and effect, i.e., I do this, therefore I'm going to suffer a similar instance. And I think that can occur. So once upon a time, I was in a relationship and I was very much in love, and this person loved me in the ways that they were able. And ultimately, we both had some healing to do. In this dynamic, I do have to take ownership of the fact that I was not always able to verbalize my needs as much. I could be a bit of a brat, and I was not able to emotionally regulate the ways that I am now. And then fast forward 2 years later, where funnily enough, I got to sort of switch roles, if that makes sense. I got to be in a position where I was with someone that I saw as not necessarily able to emotionally regulate. And my experience with them, they were a huge brat. And I got to switch roles and be the person that I, in that instance, loved, but also hurt. And I will never forget, there was just a clear moment when I was like, wow, I bet this is exactly how so-and-so felt. And like quite literally, like I thought of this person and I was like, this must have been what it was like to date me. Oh my gosh. And it was very eye-opening. And I will say that because we are all different, I was able to make that identification. And being on the healing process myself, I was then able to also, and I'm giving myself a pat on the back, by golly, to show up in ways that in that other dynamic, as much as that other person had been there for me, we are no longer aligned and connected because they couldn't be the me that I try to exist to be for other people, if that makes sense. But so karma, it can be in those ways to where sometimes you get to quite literally experience the energy that you created. But I will go sideways. So, trigger warning. At one point in my life, I was invited to dinner by like a mutual acquaintance friend of a good friend of mine. And funnily enough, I don't talk to this friend because I have high standards. I think that a lot of the connections that people make these days aren't even necessarily real. People don't share their honest feelings. They're conflict avoidant, and there is a lack of inherent trust. I can't trust people like that. But then more importantly, people don't have standards. The behaviors, the lack of integrity, the harm that they allow from other people, it's not safe. Like a lack of respect for oneself. Like if I see how you are with other people and you lack integrity, I can see that maybe you don't advocate for yourself. How in the heck would you ever be able to advocate for me? So I choose to be very selective in who I align with, and then also more importantly, big dynamics of people and groups that I get involved in. Because a lot of times, a lot of groups are really just normalized bullying and coping mechanisms. People like to align to the same types of interests and then exclude other people or use this as some sort of status marker to cause divination. And that's just not cool. As I see it, I will not take part in that anymore. That's one of the great things about being a grown up. And, I've learned so much of my process is unmasking and just being like, no, No, like you really don't hear me, and trying to not necessarily throw a Veruca Salt tantrum, but also be honored in my, no, I'm not gonna do this, it's okay. So, karma, just, a great one, my own personal karma. I mentioned it in another video. I used to be like the word police. When I had first, you see things about like spiritual bypassing, and I was one of those people. And it was very easy for me to not feel sanctimonious because, like, shut up is one of the best examples. Let's say that you were to say to your friend, oh my gosh, shut up. I'd be like, I know you don't mean anything by that, but you're not trying to silence them, are you? That's so disrespectful. Why would you do that? And now I reap that karma. I get to feel how I made other people feel when I say something. And in these times of high intense emotion, people will come at me and tell me I'm wrong, or they will just be so aggressive, or they will try to tell me that I'm hateful. I've used, adult language in other videos, and I may at some point swear in this video as well. But there are certain words, for example, that we are not supposed to use because they are hateful, derogatory. They could be seen as slurs or whatnot. And unironically, a lot of these words that I have reclaimed in part of my healing process has been because they've been used at me in awful ways. And I understand, like, in those instances, they were hateful. But that's one that I've really been needing to sit with and unpack because I'm really tired of people trying to tell me that I'm hateful because other people and everyone agrees that this word is hateful. And so one of them is the word with an R that ends in a D that we are not supposed to say. I have actual brain damage. Like, I've been declared medically dead a few times. And so one could say that, there is a retardation in, cells. There is cell death, etc. And a lot of people can get really uncomfortable with that. I understand, I understand hate, being hateful, being angry at someone for their inability. But I will never forget, I was watching an episode of Shameless, and I don't want to give too many spoilers, but essentially, in Shameless, because there is a family member that has a disability, they're in a disability support group. And they say it so beautifully, and this is actually what I've been speaking to. I understand not wanting to hurt people's feelings and to not be sensitive, but there is a certain level of discrimination in our practices, if that makes sense. So to use, the hard R word, and to be clear, it's not like I ever have run around and used that, incredibly hatefully. Again, I am not a hateful person. I may get angry, I may get upset, but I then always work to navigate and to breathe through it, etc. But I do want to just use examples in my own life of language that I've had to remove from my vernacular because, for example, that to me seems more scientific, less devoid of opinion and pejorative than to say this person's in need of adaptive aid. That's a judgment call, as I see it. Adaptive to what? The R word is actually, it is cold, mind you, so to speak. It is clinical, but it is a scientific observation. One would potentially say, there is a retardation amongst, etc. And I don't want to unpack this one in particular because I've already gone to sideways, but that was an example that I wanted to use for language. Because in the Shameless episode, there's a man with Down syndrome, but then there's also a man with cognitive, very clear cognitive, brain dysfunction. And he talks about how it wouldn't matter what words people use. Hateful people are hateful people. And then it was about reclaiming it. And they end with this chant, and the chant goes, artard, metard, utard. And to be clear, this is not like I'm running around, and this is, again, it's one of those where everyone might cancel me and just think that I'm evil and condemning. And it actually came up in a relationship of mine because one of the people that I was with had been bullied in that way. And unironically, I had been bullied in the same way. And so then it got to this point where, like, the Gestapo, they were policing me. And God forbid that I, like, slipped up or even said something similar. The types of reaction that I was faced with, and the trauma and their inability to emotionally regulate because they weren't able to make peace. And I was even trying to perhaps help them understand that it's not about the word. So I get it, it is, and I don't want to be the ultimate gaslighter. Like, of course, if someone says they're uncomfortable with something, you want to try and be respectful of that. But also at the same time, why does nobody consider that we are assigning, like, we are being so narcissistic and hateful and controlling and trying to tell people, well, no, your words that you're using mean this to me, so don't use them. And that is so far off topic. Because in regards to seeing karma, I can't know if this person meant, like, specific examples, what have you. And I began with a story about a mutual friend. A friend of theirs invited me to dinner. And so I went. And at one point in the evening, this person backed me into their kitchen in a corner in a wall and kissed me. This is assault. This is SA. It is not the worst kind, and I am very fortunate, and I do want to be very clear. It did not go further than that. However, about a year later, I was driving my kids home, and on the radio, Crime Stoppers, need your help, with a blah, blah, blah. So then I go home, and I get on Facebook. This is when I still had major social media, and I see the Crime Stoppers ad. And I kid you not, it was the same person. And to be very clear, it had nothing to do with me. They had caught the person that did it, that was involved. It was, some street beef, whatever. But I found it very interesting because the person got shot in the face and they lived. And again, I think of karma and intention. And for me, that was the absolute clear moment where it was almost like a voice in my head. And to be clear, I did not hear a voice in my head, but it was almost like, cold water. There was such a shock when I was like, holy crap. This wasn't the worst kind of violence. I've been, assaulted in the same way, much worse, a few times. So by all means, this was not the creme de la creme of predators. And I have to wonder if because he wasn't as awful, he lived. And then for me, I think it was more in the experience of understanding how powerless he must have felt, how small, how weak. That sudden realization, like, oh my gosh, I'm potentially in over my head. And it was in more of that, him feeling so stripped of his power that it came to me, in all honesty. Because again, he wasn't the worst, but he still absolutely took liberties. And I do find it very fitting. I'll go a little bit sideways. I have dated a few Libras, and one of the, if you study astrology, everyone knows that anyone affected with Venus placements can like the finer things, for example, beauty, tangible experience. So, Taurus, Venus, or Taurus and Libra. But Libras especially, they have an affinity for money, as do Capricorns, but Capricorns work hard for their money, if that makes sense. Whereas Libras love that lush feeling. They love, fancier things. They love buying things. Who doesn't love a bit of retail therapy? Libras love having new gadgets, just having all sorts of the cool things. So, in two different instances, funnily enough, with exes of mine, when trying to explain to them how they hurt me, kind of almost enough is enough type instances, they were not willing to be accountable for their behavior. I cannot even begin to tell you how many times ultimately people that have sought me out, I'm just doing my thing, vibing, and they seek engagement with me, and they keep trying to get me to align with them, and then I keep mentioning potential hazards, or not hazards, but misgivings, boundaries that I have that I'm worried might not be honored, etc. And how much of my romantic history is quite literally me having been pursued, and my greatest sin is wanting to give somebody a chance to prove to me that they are as they believe they exist in their mind. And then I would never be so bold as to deduce narcissism, especially because so many of my exes have placed that label onto me. And I would actually quite literally say, I don't know, I find it very odd that when we first aligned, you could not help but notice how intelligent I was, how I've introduced you to so many new things that you can't see. And unironically, at this point now, suddenly I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about, etc. Karma. I'm going to give you a great example. Once upon a time, when I was with... Oh, let me finish this story before I get too sideways, because I am getting close to my end of time limit at this point. But I was planning on doing something else, and then I was inquired, an inquiry was made, and so then I went with this train of thought. So, with these Libras, they did not try to address my feelings or concerns. You know, the I'm sorry words. But an apology without change behavior is manipulation. And an apology with change behavior that is really no more than a Walmart rollback, and them only going, from sale from $5 to $4.97. Brava, thank you for that. But come on now, is this the results of the participation medal generation? Karma. So because I didn't necessarily care, in both instances, and I found it very ironic, two different exes during different windstorms, trees crashed through their house. Now, I'm not such a creeper that I keep track of this. One of them I talked to for a while periodically. We would talk back and forth. The other one, a family member was friends with and explained that to me. I was like, oh my gosh. And I felt bad, but I also couldn't help but have that human thought for a moment. Like, well, they do care about their material things. Pity. Now they kind of know what it feels like to be wrecked and destroyed like I did. And maybe that's, me in my awfulness, my assholic nature, in my schadenfreude. I certainly wasn't happy for them, and I didn't appreciate their misery. But that's another one. And then lastly, I gave an example on cheese. So I love cheese. As I get older and being of Asiatic ancestry as well, cheese does not love me. And, cause and effect, or actions, etc. Is my karma suddenly punishment if I'm having some flare-ups? Maybe, my skin's not doing so great, or maybe I have too much mucus, or my joints are really achy, or I've got a lot of head congestion, and so then I have to eat less cheese. Is it a punishment? Or is it just also partly a gift that I'm able to sort of feel my body and understand my body in this way? And then I'm given the opportunity to really love and honor my body in making these choices and these changes. Everything is everything, and depending on who we are and where we're at, we make everything the way it is. I.e., in those instances with my past lovers, it's hard sometimes, because again, every single relationship that I have ever had romantically, I've mentioned to that, and that is my karma in that. I don't know that I will ever date again. I don't believe it's possible. I think that I have potentially been irrevocably scarred and will not be able to trust men. And that could be karma. But I don't see it as a punishment, because my life is so fulfilled and complete. And again, as I mentioned, I was never one, for example, to seek relationships. But now, especially that I'm like, no, let's just be friends. It has absolutely just opened up an entire new world for me. And again, is it a punishment? Sure, I guess, because of the choices that I made, because of the choices that they made. But the great thing is we are all growing and learning. Karma is a living, breathing entity of itself. So much of it based on our intentions. So this is obviously a much shorter video, and me just unpacking a few things and giving examples of karma as I see it. With that, tread ever so carefully, just because you are creating ripples in the universe and you don't necessarily know how that effect will be, and you don't know how the karma will come. Will you have to claim the karma from the actions, or will you be forced to witness it helplessly as somebody else experiences that which you've made another partake? So, again, no judgments, just observations. There is nothing wrong with you, good, bad, all of this. These are identifiers. And until we as people can stop shaming and really just sit with ourselves and not be hypocrites, to allow people the grace to just mess up and show up we are going to continue to be neurotic and divide over such silly things. It doesn't always have to be pretty. It doesn't always have to be perfect. La la la, everything is awesome and amazing. Because it's only in being real and learning to breathe and establish equilibrium in all of it that we are going to be true. We are going to be authentic. We are going to be safe, supportive spaces for people. And it is my hope for all of you that you find what you need to do and what that looks like for you to do that. To find your most authentic self and be your most authentic self. So thank you for sharing some space with me. I'm loving you this day and always. And hopefully this didn't sound like some big old wine fest. Because again, that was my karma. Like, I'm good with it. All of it led me to where I am now. But I do have to speak to certain anecdotes. Anecdotes. I love you. I know I don't have to know you, but I know that you are doing this with me right here, right now, in your different ways, contributing to all of the vibrations. So, how are we changing the world today? Mwah!